Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I am Chris Clement. It's so nice to be back here in the studio with you, Sean.
Thanks for showing up.
Yeah, well, it's been a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles.
I guess so.
I mean, I should say planes and Ubers all week long.
Well, you missed a good episode with Andy Bookless.
It was
talking about
fantastic.
British
I listened to it on one of my plane rides.
Oh, good.
Nicely done.
Thanks.
Well,
I didn't really talk. It was Andy, but we've got a great guest today.
We have somebody in person in the studio gracing us with his, amazing
And
angelic presence.
another repeat guest,
Yes.
Steve Chucri, coming back for more.
It's good to be with you both, I think.
Yeah. President and CEO of the Arizona Restaurant Association.
As
And,
last time I checked,
yeah.
unless you've had a conversation with my board of directors that I haven't.
Well, you've been there for a long, long time.
20 years.
20 years.
20
I mean,
years.
back when I was, just a lad.
Yeah, you
Serving-
slept in cases of
Slept
beer.
in cases of beer.
In
There you
Tucson.
were.
And you did a good job at it, and
You
so
know,
did your family.
We tried. We tried for sure.
Well, congratulations to the two of you on this great new facility.
Yeah, thanks.
This is really impressive.
It's a little bit different, and
Quite
I think it doesn't have that NPR feel that our old studio had.
No,
Well, do you remember last time I was there? We actually was, at the time they were issuing COVID shots.
Oh yeah.
And so we were navigating that parking lot of lines at your old place,
Yeah.
trying to get into the studio and everything else. So
Yeah.
this is great.
Did you know that back then they were saying that if you took the COVID shot, you would not get COVID?
That's right.
And they were saying you couldn't give COVID to somebody else. Guess what?
Yeah,
Not true.
not true.
Not true.
Not true.
About everything about the vaccine was not true. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there was some testimony in Europe on that last
Yeah,
night. Oh my
yeah.
gosh, can you believe that?
Well, I mean, we covered this a little bit when we had you last time because we were in the midst of COVID. But what it did to the restaurant business. What's how are things looking now?
Unnecessarily.
Well, it's fascinating, Sean, that you asked the question, because you go back to 2020, and you'll recall our conversation at our last visit, that we had probably the worst year, as many people did, no matter what business you happen to be a part of, but especially in the restaurant industry, that I think I did more interviews in that 1 year than I did my entire career at the Restaurant Association.
Wow.
And had I had a nickel for every interview I did where I said, I'm not sure what's going to come in 2021, I would have been completely wrong, because the response was overwhelmingly positive for the restaurant industry in 2021, as many industries, but in particular, the industry I care about, the restaurant industry. So we went from a 2020, where in March of that year, we went from a daily payroll of 14 million down to 2 million in a matter of 48 hours.
Oh my.
We laid off 80% of our workforce, which was 80% of around 300 at the time, 300,000 people. So we went from that and losses of about 2.75 billion in Arizona, 275 to 300 billion across the country, to an increase, rapid increase in 2021. So what do we attribute that to? We had patrons and customers that would say, we don't want to see anyone in 2020. We want to pick up our food on a table outside your restaurant, to overcrowded dining rooms
Right.
and waiting areas in 2021. So the long story short is that we had an overwhelmingly positive experience in 2021, and it's continuing to happen throughout this year, throughout the state, throughout the country. I think Arizona is particularly lucky that our population growth has really, I think, sustained the industry, or else we'd have a saturation of restaurants. I mean, I don't need to tell any of you or your listeners about what it's like to go out to a restaurant now.
Yep.
However, if we didn't have the growth here in Arizona, and we can attribute that to a lot of things, we would probably be in a different scenario, I think, where we would have restaurants just getting by.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've obviously seen that across the country. Certainly, probably in California, where a lot of restaurants are still shut down or never coming back. Other, I would say, blue states. New York. It hasn't come back as robust.
No.
Philadelphia, Chicago is
DC
sort of coming back now. I was just there this last week, and they feel like they're coming back. But a lot of the restaurants, even midweek, because they aren't getting the convention business that they used to, are empty. We were at a sister location to Steak 44 here, Steak 48, and it was busy, but it wasn't. They said it's not like it was.
And we're in Chicago?
In Chicago,
Oh, really?
yeah.
Yeah, Chicago, especially on the crime side, and this is all anecdotal,
Yeah.
but I hear college applications are going down. at some of the premier universities in Chicago because of the crime.
Yeah.
And you're right about California, that we're seeing such an influence of people coming here that restaurants are tending to struggle. And you saw what the legislature did, and the governor signed into law with this FAST Act, which basically gives governance to an appointed body, not an elected body, to oversee segments of the restaurant industry in California. And they can dictate wage, they can dictate all types of things, which is just kind of the antithesis of what we would ever expect in the business industry to see happen. And it's going to shut restaurants down without question.
Yeah, and that affects the most vulnerable folks in our population.
Oh, 100% it does.
You know, which is why shutting down restaurants and bars, even in this state at that time, wasn't the right decision.
Yeah.
And it's affected, as restaurants and bars are still trying to come back across the country. It's devastating.
Yeah.
Both to communities and to families and everything else. That's why you're seeing, I think, increase in drug abuse, you know, suicide, all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but thank goodness we're here because we've had a much more robust recovery. And, you know, as you pointed out, that things are going very well right now compared to where you're saying that all of last year was
Yeah, so our total
16 billion?
sales, Sean? Yeah, so our total sales last year for the state of Arizona were just over about $16 billion, which, you know what the state budget was that they just signed into law here a few months ago. I think that was, 14, maybe 15? And as of July 22, our total sales from what we've seen were about just over $13 billion.
Wow.
So
you're gonna
that's
crush
halfway,
that
yeah,
number.
so that's halfway through the year. We've got some restaurants, believe it or not, in the summer months doing over $1 million that month, which is really, really odd for us. Because as people who grew up in Arizona, you know, back in the day, we did not have seasons because not that many people left Arizona in the summer. They couldn't afford to, or they might go up to Flagstaff or Pine Top, but they couldn't really afford to vacate the state. And so seasonality kind of came on its own in the late 2009s, 2010s, and then it's been here ever since. Well, people are still staying here, and the frequency of restaurants use in the summertime, at least the past 2 years, has been very high. We expected that in 21 because people are still scared to travel, but in 22, we weren't expecting that. And I will say, you know, selfishly, that the diversity of menus and ingredients and things that we provide now is far different than growing up here. I joke that we had two kinds of food growing up in Arizona in the 80s, Mexican food and then a different kind of Mexican food. That was it. That was it, right? And now you're seeing, you know, varieties of sushi, and whether it's Indian cuisine or Thai cuisine, it's wonderful.
Well, and also you're seeing more restaurants get nationally recognized through
Oh,
James
absolutely.
Beard and other organizations that do that. And we have some incredibly distinct restaurants here that people come to visit, and when they come to Arizona, they want to go to, you know, all sorts of different restaurants. Yeah, Bianco, Binkley's, others
Yeah.
who you know, create these incredible experiences as well.
They do. And even with our restaurant weeks, which I'm proud to tell you, I think we're going on 15 years strong. Now, people will call in and say, we want to make sure we're timing our visit to Arizona during one of your restaurant weeks because they want to experience all the restaurants and what they have to offer. So it's a wonderful business to be a part of. I'm proud to be a part of it for 20 years. I'm now invested in the industry and building restaurants as a partner. And I just, you know, we're, like I like to say, the industry of opportunity, and you both know that, and we'll continue to be the industry of opportunity where someone can come in as a janitor and be a manager or even an owner someday.
Yeah.
And we're proud of that fact in the restaurant industry, and we'll remain proud of that fact because we will like to create those opportunities and see people grow.
Are you worried that the Arizona legislature might pursue some public policy prescriptions, just like California?
I don't think so. I'm hopeful that the presence of mind in our current legislature, and hopefully those coming into it come 2023, that they understand the value we bring. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of bad ideas out there, like you just saw and stated in California, which who would ever have thought that? Now they're trying to take that to the ballot, and if they do, I think they'll be successful in opposing it, or at least getting it stayed. But the more you try to dictate to an economy, whether that's the restaurant economy, whether it's the automobile economy, whatever that economy might be, the more you're going to, I think, have the opposite of an outcome.
Exactly.
And we see that in the wage issue. I've said that to reporters
Right.
on the minimum wage for many, many years, that they thought that we were just trying to hold hostage our employees. We didn't care about them. And keep in mind, some of these employees have been with restaurants for decades, right? And they consider them family. But there is a price point that you can't really go beyond in the restaurant industry, where in other industries you can. And so we're seeing technology more and more come into play because of that expensive labor. We're seeing dishwashers making $23 to $24 an hour, which is unsustainable. And you're now going to see robotic arms in the back of the house and kitchen turning French fries or hamburger patties. It's happening.
I mean, that's probably the craziest thing, is that on the wage front and specifically what's happening in California, they're trying to make, fast food restaurants or fast food employees highly paid, union employees for all intents and purposes. And that's not the intent of those jobs. Those jobs has always been entry level for a reason, is to give people experience and understanding how things work, and to employ young people and give them responsibilities and
We
and
don't
earning
want
potential.
someone coming in at 22 to be a dishwasher and leaving at 65 being a dishwasher.
Yeah, exactly.
You're exactly correct. Yes.
Yeah,
The
it's
problem is
really
with,
frightening.
with what they're doing in California, it's gonna, what will happen is the automation back of the house with robotics is going to increase in California, and then it's gonna get exported to other places, so it's gonna impact employment across the country. Now, that may not be a bad thing, because I'm every time I go to a restaurant, I see a help wanted sign. I mean, all of them are
Right.
hiring.
Yeah.
It seems like they've been in a constant need of more help.
Well, they are.
And-
I mean, I've never seen a labor struggle to the degree that we are now in my 20 years of being in the industry. And that was even after 2010, where you had that whole 1070 fight where a lot of people vacated the state. So it's a challenge. But what's fascinating is when you talk about inflation, which is the topic of every hour the past probably 6 to 8 months,
Right.
you look historically at inflation, and you look in the past 12 months, or maybe even the past 8 months, grocery store, convenience store inflation is roughly around 13+% across the country. Menu price inflation for restaurants is only over 7%. So I think that's a good example and illustration of, you're not going to pay $26 for a hamburger,
Right.
no matter how good it is. And so we can't automatically push the price increases and price increases and price increases. You go to a convenience store or gas station, they're selling more food than they are gasoline,
Right.
Yeah.
right? So the competition is as fierce as it's ever been. And I know Chris likes to shop more at a QT for his family food and dinner than maybe, let's say.
My kids love QT.
Okay, there we go.
I'll just
That's
be
good.
honest
Yeah,
with
yeah.
you.
Disneyland dad.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
So-
for some
so-
reason, those hot dogs are big hit in my family.
So for us, when we talk about these fluctuations in price and everything else, we're saying that these convenience stores and everyone else have to be accountable, just like we are when it comes to health standards
Sure.
and everything else. So it's a multifaceted experiment, if you will, on what we kind of encounter on a daily basis, whether it be supply chain, whether it be a level playing field, whether it be labor. The restaurant business isn't for the faint of heart, and everyone having a good time in a restaurant is, in our way, an ability to demonstrate our success. Because if they're not coming back, and there's
Right.
so many other places they can go to.
Yeah. Yeah. They really are.
How-
It is amazing.
On average, how many restaurants close every year?
There are certain numbers we don't track, and that's
Yeah.
one of them. So I can tell you,
It seems like
that-
and the reason I ask, it seems like on the Phoenix Business Journal, they'll have a list of restaurants that are opening, that are new, that, hey, go
Right.
try these, but then they'll have a bunch that are closing. And
That's
they don't
right.
give any reasons why, per se. Some are just exiting because they want to exit. But it seems like we're still having a significant number of closures as well,
Well-
and some long-standing restaurants exiting because of some of these, I think, external factors.
There is definitely evidence of that. I will tell you that we lost about 1,000 restaurants in 2020. All were made up in 2021.
Yeah.
We have around 10,500 restaurants in the state of Arizona. With that being said, you had some key factors. You talk about Steak 48. You talk about some of these other restaurants that are still building in Arizona and outside of Arizona, which we love. That being said, they already had restaurants in the pipeline. They already had commitments and money down. So what did they do? Not open the restaurant? So they just chose to roll the dice and say, hey, we're going to still open the restaurant, see what happens, because the alternative of shutting it down is not an option. So those restaurants remarkably succeeded. But you also, for the first time in a long time, Chris, have seen restaurants just say, you know what, it's time to close. The average shelf life of a restaurant is 20 years. That's why you see Applebee's and Chili's and many restaurants reskinning themselves. You see companies like Cheesecake Factory acquiring other brands like Fox Restaurant Concepts, which is brilliant, which is absolutely brilliant, and we applaud that and support it. However, other restaurants, for example, I think it's House of Tricks in Tempe, decided to close because they were tired. They were done. They enjoyed it.
Yeah.
No one in their family wanted to take it over. Customers are saddened by it, which we understand. That's a positive story where they decided just to say, we're going to retire, we're going to move on. The restaurant closes. I'm seeing more of that than we were forced to close. Now,
Gotcha.
you have plenty of forced closings too, to the points you're making, whether it be supply chain, whether it be just increase in cost, whether it be food cost or labor cost. People are tired. It's tough. It's a razor thin margin business.
Or just outright bad food, bad service, you know, the things that people,
Unfortunately, sometimes, yes.
well, because those are things that people still evaluate. And because there's so many choices here in Arizona, rightfully so, they you know, vote with their wallets and their feet.
They do. They do. And that's incumbent upon every restaurant to make sure they're doing it well. Or else you're going to, you know, we always say you want to make sure you have a seat at the table so you don't end up on the plate.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
So what, how do you view, so you, Chris, you talked about or asked about the legislature. I think that you're going to have a pretty conservative legislature coming out of this election. Republicans have a 1-seat majority in the House and the Senate here in the state. My guess is that it'll increase to 3 or 4, maybe even 5 in the House, and a couple more in the Senate, maybe 2,
Right.
maybe 3. It looks like Carrie Lake is on her way to winning. I've been shocked at how poorly Katie Hobbs has campaigned. So knowing that, you know, or assuming that we have a Republican governor again and a Republican legislature, that's generally been okay for the restaurant business. But what are the things that you worry about, if anything, on the public policy standpoint, regardless of who's in charge, but just in general?
I think from a restaurant perspective and what I've witnessed now, having personally invested my family's money and time and effort into concepts that we really believe in, is that you've heard, Sean, as many years as you were in politics and still are, that every elected official should at some point in their life have to sign the front of a check as well as the back of a check.
Right.
And the supply chain issues are very, very real in that when you're opening a restaurant, the goal is not to open it in June or July, right? It's almost a death sentence.
Unless it's pine
yeah.
or strawberry.
Yeah. But even then, it's too late,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. So, in the realities of just speaking under the umbrella of a restaurant, government being aware of what it takes to open any kind of business, especially the restaurant business, and avoiding obstacles to get that open. And what I mean by that is city planners, city halls allowing us to get our plans done and getting them through the process that won't take 8 months or 9 months. And fundamentally, there will be changes. We just now in a restaurant that I'm a partner in Gilbert, we're having to change the bathrooms from being outside to inside because we took a one-time banquet room and now we're having to make it bathrooms because the cost was so exorbitant. We're shaving $400,000 off the cost, right? And so those decisions are being made, and now we've got to go back into that town and say, okay, we can't afford to have you take 3 months. So it goes as low as the local level to say, hey, expediency and making sure everyone has their act together is welcomed for us.
Yeah.
Taking it to the legislative level and making sure that they're not creating laws like the FAST Act is another. And we wouldn't get that, I believe, in a Lake administration, and probably not likely in a Hobbs administration, I would argue. But certainly wouldn't get that in a Lake administration. But be aware of what's happening in our industries and don't be an impediment to that. Go take the time to educate you. And that's one thing I will give Governor Ducey credit for. I give Governor Ducey credit for a lot of things. One thing Governor Ducey did very well in his administration is during COVID, trying to reach out to us after the fact, saying, how can we help you? How do we, and they would have calls with hundreds of people, restaurateurs, and that's how we got the extension of premise. That's how we got cocktails to go. So you in government thinking you know everything, you don't. Whether you're a legislator or a governor, reaching out to those respective communities, in this case the restaurant community, and saying, how do we help you and how do we adapt? That was critical to our success.
Yeah.
Now, bars, to your point, took a hardest hit, and I still reel from that. They're doing well now, but that was one hard thing we couldn't fix. So I think getting out of the way, consult us when you're going to retain or keep the head of the Department of Liquor or tourism. Reach out to us. Let us know, because we can tell you the kind
How
of
that's
person we
gone.
need.
Yeah.
The kind of person we need, and people who have been in that role in the past and the great things they were helping us accomplish.
Yeah, great point.
So sometimes it's the little things that make all the difference.
Yeah. Well, it is, by and large, I mean, obviously the big things, tax increases, that kind of stuff, would have impact, but the day-to-day little things are the make or break.
That's
on
right.
these
And look
things.
what Governor Ducey has done, and I'm not trying to be a spokesperson for him, but the past 24 months or 12 months, there's been a lot of great things that have happened for Arizona. You talk about the influx of the economies coming into Arizona with a chip manufacturer, with the expansion of Intel, with all these other things happening. That means a lot of dollars to Arizona, a lot of dollars for restaurant.
Right.
And the restaurant industry is great. I mean, here's three things we need in life. We need to eat, right, which is the most important to me, right? You need to live somewhere and you need to work somewhere. And so the more we can foster those three daily needs, I think Arizona will continue to be successful.
Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting about COVID in terms of pushing the restaurant industry into areas where it had resisted, like outside dining for many more high-end restaurants, or even just casual dining, and also to go. You know, there's a lot of restaurants that resisted that for a long time, and now it's a significant part of their bottom line.
Chris, more so than ever.
Yeah.
To-go ordering and to-go food accounted for about 5% of your profit and loss statement. Now it's 25%. During COVID, it was really 25, maybe 27% of your sales. Today, it's still 22 or 23% of your sales. It
Yeah,
has
I've heard
not gone away.
Yeah, I've heard anywhere between 15 and 20%, so
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, it has not gone away.
And you have restaurants, you know, investing in the to-go experience and how they present that experience to you, so that the food that you normally, you know, enjoy in the restaurant tastes the same when you get home.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
our
that's-
family
that-
was that was 100% us. We stayed with that to-go habit because we realized that we enjoy having dinner together at home, even if we don't want to cook it. So we have very rarely do we actually go into a restaurant. We frequent restaurants on a very regular basis on the to-go side.
Sean, can you repeat that? So
Well, I mean, the
Like-
growth of Uber Eats and DoorDash and Grubhub
Right,
has been the purest example of that, and restaurants have different opinions about those services
Well,
in
I've
terms of
always
having
just
to.
ordered directly and gone and picked it up myself.
Okay. But
Well,
then you have other restaurants who actually employed a fleet of their own vehicles to make sure that
You're
experience
right.
was
Yeah.
was what they wanted it to
Mark
be.
Tarbell did that, and he did
Mark
it very
Tarbell
well.
did do that. and
Mark did it very well, and yeah, I joke. You
So I was
say
thinking
that
of.
because about 5 or 6 years ago, my youngest son, was asking my wife where the iPad was, and she said it's next to the cooktop, and he said, "What's a cooktop?" So that shows you how much of a restaurant family we are, because we don't even turn our cooktop on. But to your point, right? It's also a bit of a tug of war. We're now having great success in talking with the Ubers of the world, as well as the DoorDashes, about there's some responsibility on their end. And to you, Chris, just saying what you did about food and food quality, the issue went from, hey, how do we add this menu item to our menu back in 2019 to 2021? What kind of packaging can we use that's going to keep your hamburger or your food in the proper condition, right? Because if you have a bad experience, even at home, and I like to say that restaurants are an extension of your dining room. Sometimes we are your dining room.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, for Thanksgiving, we go out to a restaurant, or we bring it in and act as though I prepared it. So the realities are certain things will not keep. No matter how talented you are as a chef, certain things aren't going to keep. French fries are very difficult. So some restaurants are saying, we're not going to even offer you, how can I offer you a hot fudge sundae to bring home?
Yeah.
We can't. So it's not perfect in the to-go world because there are certain things that just simply need to be enjoyed inside a dining room of a restaurant. But we're getting very, very good at new packaging and new ability to take from the dining room or from the kitchen of a restaurant to your kitchen or to your dining room. And it's not easy. And those who do it well will tell you it's not easy. But we're very proud of the fact that we've made great, great progress just since 2021.
Yeah, it's actually been one of the great positives for your industry coming out of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, absolutely. It saved us.
Well, and the extension of premise. You know, a lot of folks who did that now, you know, are fighting to keep their patios, investing in their patios in ways they didn't before.
That's right. That's right. And it's not happening just in Arizona. It's elsewhere too. But it saved our lives. And I mean that in the literal sense that we, I think in a matter of days, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks, uploaded 12 to 1,500 menus on our platform for Restaurant Week when restaurants were forced to go ordering only. And without that, you would have seen more restaurants close.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, the outdoor dining, I mean, obviously we're going to start doing more of that here. That's cooling off. But in places like DC and New York and Philadelphia, Chicago, that's when they fire up the heaters, right?
That's right.
To do it. But I
That's
think
right.
that's something that I enjoy. I mean, I think people probably, that in many places that's going to be a permanent fixture because people
It
like
is.
that
It
experience.
is. Even in San Diego, you know, their downtown core is now, you can't go down certain streets because they've extended the patios, which is welcome news.
Yeah, you've seen that in La Jolla.
Right. And I think some jurisdictions are trying to charge for it, which I understand there's a need, but you also have to make sure, to my earlier point when you asked about what legislatures can and can't do, don't get in the way of that success.
Yeah.
You know, restaurants having a busy dining room is a necessity. It doesn't mean that they're pocketing more and more money. It's a necessity to keep the operation going.
Oh, wouldn't want anybody pocketing more
Yeah,
and more
heaven,
money.
No.
heaven forbid profit.
Heaven
course not.
forbid.
Wouldn't want to pay
Survival.
taxes.
Yeah, survival.
100%.
So what's the future look like? What do you look, 5-10 years down the line in the restaurant world?
I think you're going to see more and more automation, without question. I read a story about a flying taxi and how they're doing these little heliports. I mean, you might see food being, I think delivered via means that you've never seen or never
drones?
thought you would see. Yeah, you're going back to, the Jetson when we were kids watching cartoons, the Jetsons, and so that's a reality. And I know mapping is taking place, air mapping in LA right now as we speak, on how we can deliver in basically airways that are more like, if you would think, highway systems in the sky, as ironic as that is, that will be delivering food and commodities, whether it's Amazon or your favorite restaurant. So I think that's remarkable. We welcome it. But I also think that you're going to still see a new dimension of cuisines that may not even be on the menu today, right? And sushi has taken on a whole life form of its own, even for people who never thought they would like sushi. They do now. And the thought processes that are going into food and people wanting it, right? So the Midwest was always steak and potatoes. It's not necessarily that anymore. So I think the evolution of menus is going to be far different here in 2022 than they will maybe in 2030. I think that heavily technology-based kitchens will certainly be in place where you've got robots doing items in the back of the house. I always like to say we're in the hospitality business. We're not in the hostility business. You're going to still need that personal touch. You can't have a bartender who's a robot,
Right.
even though they exist. They were at the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago just in May. I can show you pictures of robots fixing a drink. So there
Were they
realms.
mouthing off to the customers?
They were accepting tips. How about that? But aside from that, so there are certain things you won't be able to change. But I think the look and feel of a restaurant will will certainly evolve.
I just
It
can't
doesn't-
see
it's not
anybody
continuous.
telling a robot their deepest, darkest secrets like you can your bartender.
No, but
I
here's
just don't
here's
think it's
what's
gonna happen.
Chris. Here's what's
Yeah.
fascinating about a robot. It shows up for work.
Yeah, it's reliable.
It doesn't call
never
out
late.
sick. It doesn't require health care. It doesn't require a lot of things. And unfortunately, that's what we're ending up in more segments of the industry. I think fine dining, you won't see that as much because you have to have those components. But in other segments, yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. It's really going to be fascinating to watch.
Wow. Something else. Well-
Robots serving booze.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the same.
No, because I mean, though, it's always going to be the perfect pour. It's always going to be, there's
Yeah.
not going to be that little extra that your bartender
Right,
gives
right.
you just because you've had a bad day.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. No more cheers.
No,
No.
no more norms.
Norm.
Well, Steve, thank you for being here. Anything we haven't covered you want
No,
to
well, I'm look, I love what you all do and the people you've had on, and I'm flattered to be one of them. And I thank you for letting us highlight the restaurant industry. It's a great industry, as we've discussed for the past few minutes here.
We're both heavy consumers of the restaurant
Yeah,
industry.
please continue. Please continue.
Well, consumers and former supplier. And,
That's right.
And so I keep my pulse on everything that's going on with it because some of the best relationships I've had are with restaurateurs, both in and out of our
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
And that continues since we made the move up here. I've gotten to meet a lot of different restaurateurs, and it's a great industry, and it deserves to be promoted and expanded and celebrated.
And it will continue to be, without question. I think it will continue to be. And there's so much passion that goes into the restaurant industry, and that I think will never leave. And I've got restaurateurs who have sold their businesses, and they don't regret it, but they're bored, and you're just going so fast and furious that they miss it. They miss the people, right? They miss the customers they would see on a regular basis. So we love it. Even the hotels here in Arizona are changing magnificently. I did a 3-hour tour of the remodel of the Arizona Biltmore, which is an institution. And look at their menu. It's amazing what
Yeah.
they've done
Yeah.
to some of what they've accomplished. And to the term of jealousy, right, for other hoteliers, and it's a good jealousy, but jealousy nonetheless. So I think soup to nuts, the hospitality industry in Arizona is going to continue to excel. But we can't do it without our guests. We can't do it without the support. So we're grateful for them.
Good. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great one, everybody.
God bless.
See ya.